Good afternoon and welcome to the Policy Exchange Fringe meeting, which is going to ask the question, what can the Conservatives do for Northern working class voters? I'm David Wooding. I run political coverage for The Sun on Sunday. I'm a Northerner myself for my sins, and I've crossed the Great Divide and obviously now work in London. Now the words One Nation have been bandied about quite a bit in the past week or so. But are we one nation? Can we be? And if so, how do we achieve it? Yes, the battle for the centre ground of British politics has begun. Ed Miliband started it last week, and George Osborne was recounting those two little words of Disraeli again today. But never has there been a more crucial time for this party to debate what it can do for the working classes in the North and here in the Midlands, of course. The claim that the remarks of Ed Miliband last week was his bid to occupy the central ground, and I think he seems to have done that at the moment. Conservatives, on the other hand, are at presently being portrayed as out of touch with ordinary people, friends only of millionaires, and enemies of the ordinary pleb in society, thanks to Andrew Mitchell, whose foul-mouthed tirade fed into that narrative. But perhaps the best way to contradict this is to reach out to those people who think that Conservatives are not for them. I mean, that is probably part of the problem in the North. I mean, we're talking about the 124 urban parliamentary constituencies in the North and the Midlands where the Conservatives have just 20 MPs. Now we've got some of those with us today, thankfully. We're talking about great cities such as Liverpool, probably the greatest city of all.
He speaks for himself.
Sheffield, Newcastle, and Manchester, where they don't have a single councillor. Now, why is this? Is it just culture? Is it that they think the Conservatives are not for them, or is it that Conservatives aren't doing enough for those areas? I don't think it's necessarily culture, and I think it's something that can be combated. My first political memory was as a child in my grandfather's two up, two down terraced house with an outside loo in a place called Toxteth, which is one of the most deprived areas of Liverpool where I was brought up. And he was screaming at his little black and white television at the Prime Minister. That Prime Minister was Harold Wilson, and he was a Labour Prime Minister. And our local MP was a bloke called Richard Crawshaw, who was a Conservative MP for Liverpool Toxteth between 1964 and 1983. And I checked today and found that before him, since 1950 to 1964, a chap called Ray Bevins, another Conservative, was MP for Toxteth. So it is doable. What's gone wrong up there, I want to ask today? 1983, I think, was the time when I was covering, when the Conservatives lost Toxteth, when Derek Hatton rose to power in Liverpool. What was he doing right? What were the Conservatives doing wrong? Well, for the next hour or so, we'll be asking what the Conservatives can do for the working class voters. And Policy Exchange have assembled a very good panel to help debate that. On my left here we've got Kris Hopkins. He is one of the 2010 intake, as in fact are all three of our MPs here today, for the Northern constituency of Keighley and Ilkley in Yorkshire. So maybe he's got the answers to why Conservatives can be elected in those areas. He also served with the Duke of Wellington's regiment, little plug for The Sun on Sunday here, who we revealed in The Sun on Sunday before it happened that it was going to be axed in the cuts. On my right here we've got Guy Opperman, also a Northern MP. He's in fact MP for Hexham constituency in the North East, which is the biggest constituency in the north of England. And he, just to show his northern roots, he walked for 22 days from Sheffield to Scotland this summer. Then we've got Alok Sharma. Again, he's elected in 2010, but he's from the south. Boo. For Reading, who are playing Liverpool in a week's time, and I'm dreading that match. But he's been at the coalface too, or the factory floor, to be more honest. So he's had a wide range of jobs, including he's been on a production line, a company auditor, tutoring university students and advising companies. So he's certainly got a good CV in reaching out. And of course here we've got Neil O'Brien, Director of the Policy Exchange, who's from Uddersfield, always to be said without the H, who knows a little bit about the North because his think tank produced a report by one Tim Lunig some while ago, which created a storm by saying that we should give up on the North, particularly Liverpool, Sunderland and Bradford, give up all the regeneration money and send everybody down to the south. It was dubbed insane by the Prime Minister. But maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that later. So what we have to say is, what is it? Is it we look back at the 1960s a second ago, it's about the 21st century now. We want some solutions. Is it jobs, welfare dependency, infrastructure, housing prices? What is it? We're about to discuss it first, and we'll get a few words from everybody, then we'll throw it out to questions. So we'll ask Kris to start.
Well, afternoon everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. Trying to understand, I mean, where's the line where the North starts? I mean, I think, you know, this idea that people who live in a shoebox at the bottom of the lake, somehow it's just above Nottingham and everybody else up there is not voting for us. I mean, it is a very, very diverse landscape, peoples, economies, demographics. And if you look at Liverpool, if you look at Bradford, look at Leeds, Manchester's, look at the conflicts that's still going on there between Lancastrians and people from Yorkshire, and trying to understand the different dynamics that play in that. Looking at the histories of their own economies, look at the skill base, look at the dependency on massive nationalised industries, and then trying to understand how it fits into today's and UK and global economies. It's very complex, and some of it takes generations to actually address. But the big issues on the doorstep, the biggest issue is immigration. That's the one that I'm definitely to the left of the party. But I tell you, on the doorstep, the one that comes over and over again is the issue of immigration. And the last government lost control. People lost confidence in their immigration policy and their ability to control the borders, and we've got to address that. And we don't address it in one, press a button, sort it out. 13 years of Labour takes a long time to address that. But we've got to do that. We've got to give people confidence on that issue. Welfare, the second biggest approval thumbs up we've had, I think, is around welfare. People out there who work really hard, low-paid jobs, grinding it away, and their next-door neighbour gets up, tosses it off, goes and gets a cheque through the post and does bugger all. Well, do you know what? I think I'm on the side of the person who gets up and works really hard, and we need to get a system that works for it. So that's a really important bit. Next thing is public services. We've got a habit in this party of kicking the public services, and some of them are fairly current. I really treasure the work that our NHS do, our low-paid staff there. I treasure the work that our police officers going out unarmed, doing very dangerous jobs, trying to keep law and order on our street. And we need to be a bit more respectful to the public sector. They are good people who, in the vast majority of them, earn very little money and do a very hard job. And we need to get our head around that. Some of this, I think, is about politics and identity. Trying to understand who you're talking to here. And the dynamics of all communities are complex. But when you have a lot of, posh is a fairly evocative word of late, but you've got to be able to relate to that individual. And I've got to say, actually, David Cameron has a side of him which is able to actually talk to a lot of people. But I think, actually, some of the other members of our party need to think about how they construct their sentences and the content of it, and how they, and who they're talking to. Well, that's a very diplomatic way of saying it.
Is there anyone in particular?
Yeah, you can use your imagination. Do you know, I think fundamentally what we've got to do is we've got to gain the trust of people. And that's a long way from the hated party of '97. And we've taken some of a journey there, but actually still people don't trust us. And I'm going to just briefly talk about the miners' strike. And you say, oh God, the miners' strike, 20 years ago. Actually, people, that doesn't roll off people's psyche, it isn't off their lips, it isn't in there, but the hatred which actually was instilled into that mindset is still there. And I mean, we saw the BBC piece the other day, they're up in Tynemouth, and somebody said, what would it what can I do to get you to vote Tory? And there was nothing. There was no amount of money that they could give these decent middle-class bods. They weren't ever going to vote for us. And we've got to unpick why that happened. And I'll give you a top tip. A friend of mine from Rotherham, he's a journalist, he said it wasn't just the fact that you closed the pits. It wasn't just the fact that there was probably a very good economic reason why you did it. Is the fact once you closed it, you buggered off and left them there. You didn't do aught to actually go through the transition of regenerating those areas, and when the Labour Party got in, they spent huge amounts of money, massive amounts of money building new house, new estates. Some of it was completely bonkers they did, but actually they gained a lot of friends on there, and the narrative around what the Tories did in Yorkshire sticks. It's like a long time to unpick that. So trust, empathy, understanding, and fundamentally caring for them. Do you care for my mum and dad? Do you care for my kids going to school? Do you care about the quality of health in my local education? It's not rocket science, this. It's very simple stuff. But actually, we don't talk about it enough.
Thank you, Kris. We'll have Alok next then, please.
Thanks, David. As you've said, I'm the token southerner on this panel. My one redeeming feature, I guess, is I spent 6 years studying and working in Manchester, so I don't know whether that redeems me at all in your eyes. But I think one of the interesting things that I found, and I'm sure Neil will talk about this, but striking features of the report that you produced on the North and voting patterns in the North, is that middle class voters, sort of basically AB social groups, are more likely to vote Labour in the North than working class DE social groups are in the South. And that really is quite striking. And a parallel, I think, is very much when we look at what happens with the ethnic minority communities in the UK as a whole. As part of this recent sort of changes, I have been appointed at Central Office to try and put together our party strategy in engaging with BME communities. And I think a lot of this comes down to how we communicate and effectively values. Do we as a party care for people, whether they're within the BME community or in the North? Do we genuinely care? I think this was the point that Kris was making. Because if you look at a lot of the policies that we're putting out there, they're actually very popular. Welfare reform. I would say that actually that policy is even more popular in the North than it is in the South. I mean, we can have a discussion where, a household getting £26,000 a year, effectively post-tax, what that means in the South as opposed to the North. Immigration. I think the cap on economic migration, very popular. The messaging around crime, again, very popular in the North. So you have to ask yourself, if you have some of these big flagship policies, which actually are very popular in parts of the country, why is it that we're not able to translate that into votes? And I think it does come down to messaging, but I think it also comes down to actually selling the message quite aggressively. I think one of the other pieces of research that I found quite astonishing from the work that Neil and his team did was that Margaret Thatcher apparently rates more favourably than any other leader except Tony Blair in the North, which is astonishing, really. And I'm sure, Neil, you'll comment on this a lot more. But I think what it demonstrates is that there is a requirement not just to communicate, but also for effectively conviction politics. People want to really know and understand why they should support you, and actually want politicians who are then able to engage. So I think that is the big challenge for us as a party. I think in terms of policies, the sort of policies that we're talking about apply as equally in the North as in the South. Clearly there are issues in part of the North to do with what percentage of GDP is taken up by effectively the public sector. And I think Kris is absolutely right that Labour were actually shameless in terms of what they did in certain areas. So we need to have a rebalancing of the economy. I think that is going on. And what we also want to make sure is that we get a lot more private sector investment up in some of these regions, because that is what's going to be sustainable at the end of the day. And the final point I want to make is that in terms of our messaging, we shouldn't be shy, but I think, David, you made the point, there are parts of the North where we have no longer any representation in terms of councillors. Well, that's something that the party has to absolutely address, because until you've got people on the ground who are putting out the message and selling the message, and for people in some of these northern urban cities actually relating to that message, we will always have an uphill struggle.
Excellent, thank you, Alok. I'll now call upon Guy to tell us what his remedy is.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and stand up so some of you at the back can see me. My name is Guy Opperman. That is not a very northern name, as you might have told and might have guessed. I spent 22 days this summer, from the 1st of August to the 22nd of August, walking from Sheffield all the way to Scotland. It was an exceptionally long way. It rained almost all the time. I did 14 separate events, ranging from the Comrades Club, that very pro-conservative organisation in Haltwhistle, to the Sheffield Working Men's Club with a Labour MP and a double act on behalf of Headway, the charity. I learned an awful lot. I met a huge amount of people. I did events on behalf of Conservatives in Skipton and Ripon, in Colne Valley. I did an event just outside Halifax, and they said, Mr. Opperman, I barely understand a word you could say. Are you from Sheffield? Or is it Burnley? And he just didn't know me at all. But there was no sense of identity either, that we were standing up for them. And that is what we need to address. So my understanding is this. I don't agree necessarily that the immigration cap or the welfare cap is the passport back to success with blue-collar workers in the Northeast. I really don't. I think they are important aspects of government policy, but it matters far more that apprentices are up 63%. It matters far more that we've taken the low paid out of tax. It matters far more that we are changing the way that education is provided in this country, whether it is the range from pupil premiums for the low paid to the persons in relation to who suffer from problems of special needs, to all the advances of academies and free schools. Those are the policies that are really kicking in and really making what we are doing on the doorstep popular. And you talk about welfare. I don't talk about it as something that is a detrimental thing. We should be judged by how we look after those who cannot look after themselves, and that I consider is a very strong point of what we do. And we impose a welfare cap, not because we have anything against people who are claiming welfare, it's because we want everybody to be working together. I want the 5 million people who we inherited on benefits, I want those people helping to turn this economy around, helping to turn the country around, being some use, being actually involved in what we're trying to do. Those people have a great deal to offer and have a great deal to give us. So I see it slightly differently, but I also see it very much that people need to have an ownership. They need to have a belief that what we are doing as a coalition government is something that reflects in what they see in their everyday lives. I'll give you 2 examples. In my local school in Pridda Castle in Northumberland, I went round it, and the 7-year-old girl who was giving me the little tour said to me, I'm actually on the school council, and this school council decides what it is the teachers spend the money on. And you had this massive sense of empowerment of a local community, who happened to be 7 and 8-year-olds, of they actually believed totally in the school, and were then in a position, the school was immaculate. There was no graffiti, there was no problems, attendance was superb. And they spoke with such pride about that there on the wall, that whiteboard, we organised that, we made that happen. It's similar with businesses. If you have a business with a community fund, those people feel an empowerment, an enjoyment of what it is the business is doing. And I finished on local banks. We have campaigned remorselessly to try and get local banking out into the north so that you actually have a situation that you don't go to some faceless bureaucrat in Newcastle or York or in Leeds who then says to you, I can't help you, I can't do anything about your business, I'm not going to get involved. If we empower the local community, so you have local banks run for the community, by the community, with profits and the benefits going back to the community, that is something that will make people in the north say, this is what we want, this is how we would like our countryside, and this is how we would like the north to be. So I consider that this is a fight to be won. I give you one example. We have struggled, and it is right that in towns like Liverpool, Newcastle, Middlesbrough, there are a lack of Conservative councillors. Of course there are. We have struggled because we were not the alternative. it became a situation that the only two votes that you could possibly cast in an urban city was for Labour or for the Liberals. And the Liberals effectively said, you can't vote for the Conservatives because they're nasty, but you wouldn't want to vote for the Labour Party because they're useless. So you could vote for us. That is changing. And we see it certainly in my part of the world, where the Liberals who used to have some degree of control are slowly losing that power. And for example, we had a county council by-election in the summer in Hexham. The Conservative vote went up 10%, the Liberal vote halved, we took the seat. There is a scope for us to do exactly that in the towns and the cities, and I personally see great future for us to take the great charge that we need to make in the large cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Another excellent contribution. It's very interesting that giving the Liberals a bit of power might be their undoing. Give them more. Right.
Not too much.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, David. I feel like I should start my presentation with a sort of series of apologies, really. The first is for the title of this event about working class people in the North, which sort of plays into every stereotype that's already there. Of course, some of you, the more perceptive members of the audience, will have noticed there are working class people in the South, and you can get sun-dried tomatoes north of Birmingham. It is possible, and this fast walk that was undertaken in the summer from Sheffield to the very top of the country, there are also roads there as well. You don't have to walk. That's I feel like I should apologise for my own accent as well. I feel like I'm letting the side down quite badly. I grew up, I spent the first 18 years of my life in Huddersfield, but everyone else in my family is Glaswegian, which has given me this weird accent. Weird to the point where I was asked by someone for the BBC the other day where in Australia I was from. For them, a bright career in investigative journalism clearly beckons. And I should apologise also for the famous Policy Exchange report on cities, which came out about 2 weeks before I took over at Policy Exchange. The first ever media call I had to field was someone from the Yorkshire Post saying, "So then, you're from Huddersfield, why are you joining a think tank that says that the North is rubbish?" So that's one of those questions that's quite hard to answer. But of course, actually that report didn't say the North was rubbish, it didn't say that everyone should leave Liverpool, and it was actually quite an interesting and nuanced critique of what had gone wrong with the last government's urban regeneration policies. So, about a year ago, we had an event a bit like this, and a lot fewer people here, and it's interesting that this is obviously becoming a more and more topical issue. And we talked about poll finding that Anthony Wells had come up with, the finding that Alok mentioned, that working class people in the South are more likely to vote Tory than middle class people in the North. And that actually sparked an investigation, a big piece of polling called Northern Lights, trying to explore the geography of public attitudes now. And I would encourage you to read it, but to summarise a really long report, it finds basically the Conservatives have a series of 4 problems. They have a problem everywhere with being perceived as the party of the rich, which is something that they need to work on everywhere. They have a particular problem in urban areas outside the southeast. Now, people often talk about the Tories doing badly in the north, but that's much too simplistic. Actually, if you look at rural seats in the north, the overwhelming majority of them are held by the Conservatives. It's really about the urban areas. And another challenge which is linked to that is that the Conservatives do very badly among various ethnic minorities. Both ethnic minorities are all completely different. I mean, among younger Hindus and Sikhs, the Conservative Party is certainly in contention. Among other ethnic minority groups, particularly Black Africans, it does really very badly, getting only about 1 in 20 votes. So, a series of overlapping challenges. What does the Conservative Party do if it wants to address these things? So, everything that they need to do to address those problems are the sort of things they need to do everywhere in the country. They're not just specific to the North or to working class people. It's just that the things that they need to do in those areas are it's sort of the same problem but even more intense there. So the top priorities for voters everywhere in this country at the moment are jobs, growth and the cost of living, and those things are even more the top priorities in the North and among working class people. So focus on growth. And on the North, it's interesting to look at how the North's economy has done over the last 13 years. So Labour came in with a huge majority, a brilliant public spending outlook. They could spend masses and masses of money, ran up public spending from just over 1/3 of our economy to nearly 1/2. And it had 13 years in government. Fantastic. They really cared about the North. They wanted to close the North-South gap. That's a big priority for Tony Blair. And what happened? So Yorkshire went from being 10% behind the national average in terms of GDP per capita to 17% behind, even further behind. The North West from 11% behind to 15% behind. The North East was further behind at the start and declined less, but it went from being 21% behind to 23% behind. And that is a really alarming thing. So you had a government with good intentions, loads of money to spend, and lots of time, and yet the North fell further behind the rest of the country. Now that's true of other parts of the country too. It's true of Wales, true of the Midlands too. Scotland is really the only part outside the southeast that's managed to catch up with the southeast. And there's a huge variation within the North. You will be pleased to know that there is a city in the North which has actually kept pace with the national average, and it is, can you guess?
Well,
it is Liverpool.
Yes.
It is Liverpool. So despite all the things I always said about Liverpool, actually it's done not that badly. Tyneside also doing well, the south of Manchester pretty well too. Other parts, the parts of the north that are not doing so well are particularly the coastal parts, and this is something our famous cities report pointed out. Blackpool, the north of Lincolnshire, Hartlepool, really, really struggling. And again, in unemployment, the picture is really mixed. So some bits of the north are doing quite well, but bits of the country like Teesside, Hull, Bradford and Sunderland, really, really serious problems. What can we do about all this? So, in The Guardian the other day, I was pointing out some of the things we could do to balance clearly welfare reform, really tough welfare reform. Further moves on welfare reform are a big part of the answer to unemployment, and they're also really, really popular. And we've been coming up with a lot of ways that the government can go further beyond just universal credit in changing the way that job centres work, in terms of asking more from unemployment benefit claimants and asking them to do more. But the other side of that equation has also to be more help. I had a really interesting exchange. I didn't have to do any questions a couple of months ago up in Barnsley. And after we came off, I'd been on with Diane Abbott, and she said, I knew when I came up here, all I'd have to do to get a massive round of applause is to mention 2 words, Margaret Thatcher. And it was true. She did mention them, and she did get a big round of applause. And Dan Hannan, who was on the panel, said, but Dan, you cannot, 30 years on, you cannot seriously keep going on about this. This isn't, this isn't the answer. And that is a fair point, but it doesn't solve the problem, because of course, politics has a momentum. It's like an object thrown in space where there's no friction. It just keeps going and going until you do something about it. And you need to go back, as has already been pointed out, and do something really big and really bold if you want to ever change the minds of people in those areas. So, things like increasing the incentives to work by increasing, for example, the working tax credit, having tax breaks for people, employers who employ people on low incomes. For example, even in doing direct government job creation, in some parts of the country where the labour market is the most messed up, where unemployment is the highest, we just need something to oil the wheels of getting the economy going, and also to oil the wheels politically of a robust welfare reform. How could we pay for it? I would personally look at the aid budget, but I understand the good and principled reasons why the Prime Minister's not doing that. I'd also look at middle class benefits. I'd look at middle class pensioner benefits as well. Do we really want to send Alan Sugar his cheque for the winter fuel payment? Do we want to give him a free bus pass? He doesn't really need that, given the state that the country is in. One issue that's obviously very central in all this is about national pay bargaining. And MPs in the North might say, oh my God, what are you talking about? This is not part of the answer in terms of the Conservatives doing better in the North. Now, we've been doing some work on the end of national pay bargaining, because it is potentially one way that we could boost the economy of the North. In our report that we published about a month ago, we propose a very specific form of ending national pay bargaining and moving to more local pay bargaining, in which all the benefits of doing that, all the savings that we might make by doing that, are not sucked away to London or the South East, but they are reinvested in the poorest parts of the country, reinvested in the regions in the North and the Midlands that might have the bigger surpluses in the public sector. And we worked out that we could create something in the order of 288,000 jobs as a minimum estimate in the poorest parts of the country. So, on the one hand, national pay bargaining and the discussion about it clearly poses some very big dangers for the Conservatives in the North. On the other hand, if they could reset the debate, if they could go down a very different route, there is also potential to boost the North's economy. Other things that you could do, you could look at housing planning and regeneration in the town centres. So at the moment we have this mad situation where we have a housing shortage on the one hand, and we have lots of empty shops on the other. The number of empty shops in the northwest, for example, is about twice the rate it is in the north, in London. So it's a problem which is much bigger in the north. And there is nothing like a town centre full of cash converters, empty shops, charity shops, to really drag down economic morale. It really is the barometer people use of how the economy more broadly is doing. So if you can do things that let people change those shops into new housing, for example, which is currently blocked by a lot of local authorities who are determined to hang on to their own powers, that is one way to clean up town centres and to get the economy moving. More generally, I think there are big opportunities to do things on welfare to help people move to opportunity. There is in the last Conservative manifesto and in the Liberal Democrats manifesto as well, there was a promise to create the right to move in social housing. Very difficult. If you're one of the 1 in 5 households who's in a council house, you can't just move to that job opportunity because you're stuck where you are. You can't, unless you can find someone who wants to swap in exactly the opposite direction, you can't do anything. And that right to move, very important idea, very important electorally as well, it seems to me has just sort of disappeared down the memory hole in DCLG, and so it would be good to retrieve it and put it back on the front page of the next Conservative manifesto. So that's enough from me. Those are some ideas, but it's not an easy solution to any of these things electorally. It's not going to just be one big idea, but I think there are a lot of different opportunities, and given that what's been tried over the last 15 years, as I mentioned in terms of how the North's economy has been doing, hasn't really worked despite all the money, despite the opportunity. It's clearly time that we need to try something new. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Neil, for another excellent contribution. I'm going to throw it open to the floor now, but before we do, we're a bit tight on time. I'm sure you've all got other things to do. So I'm going to have a John Burko moment and say that just no speeches, please. Anybody's speech, I've got a big klaxon under the chair, I'll sound it. So if you can keep your questions brief, to the point, and our panel will try to answer them. Any takers? Now this gentleman in the front first.
Thank you. Gary Hickton, Town Councillor, and thank you. And 2010 parliamentary candidate in Ashfield. One of the biggest challenges I faced was, like what Kris has said, that people still remember when Margaret Thatcher closed the pits, and that's one of the things what does come up. And the other thing is about people who don't go to work. That's another big issue with people up there in Ashfield and everywhere else. And if I just may very quickly, I can relate to a bit of this. I married a girl from Kent, so I've got brother-in-laws in Kent who call her Auntie North, and I'm from the wild beyond sort of thing. And they don't go to work, but I work. I start at 6 in the morning, finish at 2 in the afternoon. I have to be up at 3:30, travel 45 miles to do a day's job and go home again. Then I've got the council work. That's my choice, one of those things. But they don't go to work at all, and yet they've got a massive 3D television. He gets up when he wants. He's got 3 kids, and he's having a go at me because the Conservatives, or the Tories as he says, are cutting his welfare tax, or welfare, whatever it is he gets. And you know, it's quite infuriating sort of thing. My son says, why haven't I got a, you know, I've got a 9-year-old son, and he wants to know why he isn't getting all the things that their kids get. And it's quite upsetting sort of thing. So I can understand where they're coming from.
Take a series of questions.
Yes, questions. Yeah, let's have some questions. Okay, right at the back, please.
Hi, Thomas Burr. I'm not sure if it's been mentioned because I was late. As James Wharton learned to his detriment, the North has a very, very strong regional identity. And would it be worthwhile to make an explicit apology to the North for the most harsh elements of Thatcherism?
Well, apologies are all the rage at the moment. We've been doing it in newspapers, and politicians have been doing it. Kris.
Yeah, to a Tory audience, I don't think it'd be a popular move, and I don't think there's a fire exit here, is there?
There is a window.
Yeah, but on the first floor, so I won't bother. I don't think there is an apology, but I think one of the dramas we've created for ourselves is that being Conservatives, we don't fight our corner. We don't explain ourselves, what we've achieved. Margaret Thatcher did some amazing, revolutionary changes to this country, but actually, do you know what? The social stuff, do you know, we didn't do ourselves any favours either. And you know, we've got to get the balance right between, you know, the debate recently about whether Margaret Thatcher, you know, bless her soul, should have a state funeral or not. And I had friends who were saying they were going to dance on her grave, you know, when she died. You can't underestimate. I mean, I know people in my party hero worship her, and I understand why they do that. But you've got to understand there is another thought out there. And actually, if we were to try and tap into some of that, we need to understand that anger. And we need to know why it is. I don't think it's an apology. I think it's an explanation about this country. You know, we're recently talking about, you know, the car manufacturing industry, you know, going to boom. Well, in the 70s, it was on its arse. And Margaret Thatcher came along and completely transformed through very difficult processes, those regimes. So I think it's not an apology, it's an explanation that's required.
Thank you. Guy Opperman?
I think there is an acceptance that at the time in the 1980s, we were not aware of the social impact of what Margaret Thatcher did. For my part, I would like us to move on. I have no problem saying that she was an iconic and wonderful leader at a particular time, but I'm more interested in the future. I'm certainly not interested in the past. I believe that we need to move on, we need to recast the Conservative brand, we need to make it very clear that this happened 30 years ago when I was a teenager and had very little knowledge of it, certainly no interest in it at the particular time, and want to move on to see where we're going to go in 2013 and beyond. I just want to touch on welfare very, very briefly. The point about welfare is that we need everybody contributing. This country will not be turned round unless everybody puts their shoulder to the shovel. We really need everybody, and that's the fundamental ethos about the Back to Work programme.
Alok, is sorry a hard word?
Well, I mean, when it comes to Margaret Thatcher, I think what we don't want to start doing is rewriting history and starting to apologise for what Margaret Thatcher did. There are many, many things that Margaret Thatcher did that actually the country should be very proud of. I personally am a big fan of many of the things that Margaret Thatcher did. Now, when it comes to the whole issue of whether there should be an apology, no, I think too much navel gazing. Actually, what we ought to be doing is explaining very robustly what it is that we are trying to do as Conservatives, and actually our policies, and also the successes that we are having. And until we're able to do that, you're not going to connect with people in the north or indeed anywhere else. So what I would like to see is a real focus on explaining all the stuff, the good stuff, that the Conservatives are doing in government, rather than looking back to the past.
Apologised a few times already this afternoon, so should the Conservatives do the same?
There's no point in apologising, it's more about what you do about the problem looking forward. And in a sense, your apology is to go and do things that, if you think things went wrong during the 1980s, and of course, as well as things going right, also things did go wrong, the answer is to go back and to put those things right, to try and deal with the areas where worklessness has sadly become endemic. I mean, you can have an argument about the historical record. Someone will always mention, the mines in the 1980s. Of course, in the 1970s, Labour governments closed more mines and put more people out of work in mining than Margaret Thatcher ever did. But that's not how we remember things. There's no point arguing about the kind of fixed narrative. You just got to move on, look to the future, and try and address the things that people care most about, which are cost of living and jobs.
Thank you. Right. Could we have Rowena in the green here? I think she's very working class and northern. So, this lady here in the green. Thank you.
I am certainly a woman though, which is interesting given this is the second all-male panel that I've seen from Policy Exchange in a row. So right back at you. Not the panellists' fault, Policy Exchange's fault. Just to move on to my actual point, sorry about that. I'm actually, you can probably tell from my cockiness, I'm a Labour councillor in Peckham, and I've just kind of infiltrated this meeting. And I have to say to you, from the perspective of the left, the MPs that I really fear, and that the left fears, are people like Guy and people like Neil, who believe in protection for the poor, who believe in local banking, who believe in hard work and caring, actually. And I've also seen it earlier today with Sean Bailey and Jesse Norman. And I really have quite a lot of respect for where you're coming from. But my question is, the rest of your party doesn't feel that way. When you have George Osborne and John Redwood and a lot of economic liberals governing your party and taking it in one direction, I think you're going to lose the centre ground. And I'd really like to know what you think about that and what you might be doing about it. Thanks.
Wow. Are you fighting a losing battle, Guy?
Well, I'm delighted I'm popular in Peckham. And it sounds like we're going to win in Peckham if you think we're giving a good brand for that. Okay, I take your point. We have to be a party for all the country, and I certainly feel very strongly that it is, and I speak as someone who's now working in the immigration desk in the Home Office, and I'm PPS to Mark Harper. I speak as someone who fundamentally believes that the centre ground is where we're going to win elections from, and it is where the vast majority of the people are from. And we need to make very sure that the message that we are giving out is that yes, we want growth, and yes, we want robust policies, but we need to appeal for everybody. And the way we treat immigration and the way we treat welfare, I speak with the famous name of Opperman, which I can assure you is very much an immigrant's name, is very much in touch with what people really want to think, and it is not a right-wing policy as far as I'm concerned.
Alok, is there a culture in the
Well, I think what this discussion goes to is the heart of, what is fair. And I think that is, at the end of the day, what all political parties are striving for, is to be seen as being fair to those who are at the top of the pile, to those who are in the middle of the pile, and those who are at the bottom of the pile. And so, what I think the Conservatives, I believe, are doing is actually demonstrating that, whilst you need to absolutely make sure, and this is a hallmark of a civilized society, you absolutely need to make sure that you take care of those, right at the bottom. You also need to make sure that there are the right incentives to get people out to work and to be contributing. And I think that flows, across, right from the top to the bottom. So everyone has to contribute. So I think, the big buzzword, one of the big buzzwords going forward is going to be about fairness. And I think that's what every political party at the end of the day is endeavouring to have.
Neil, apart from not putting any women on the panel, are the people you've picked a rare breed here today?
Well, sorry about that. My 15th apology of this session, sorry, there's one more to do for nobody. You say sort of rampaging economic liberalism of George Osborne. The government have increased capital gains tax. They've taken lots of people out of poor people out of paying tax altogether. They've protected people on low incomes in the public sector from the public sector pay freeze. They've introduced a bank levy. So it's not all sort of rabidly, sort of right-wing, hardcore, neoliberal stuff. And I think I think people are just not facing up to the size of the deficit. So the government inherited this situation where it's borrowing a quarter of all the money it spent. We had the biggest budget deficit since the Second World War. It's just epic. And yet we just sort of forget about that and move on to having the same conversation we were having before. And so whoever's in, be it Labour, be it Tory, let's not pretend there's not going to be, all these difficult choices about public spending. The sense, I think, of what you're saying is you've got to think creatively about how you make sure everyone feels that reduction in spending that there's got to be is fair. And remember, at the end of this whole process, this whole painful process of bringing spending down, it'll still be above 40% of GDP. We'll have a bigger state as a share of the economy than we did for most of Labour's time in government. Top rate of tax is still 5p higher than it was when Labour was in government. Yeah. So you've just got to have a bit of a balance in terms of, facing up to the reality of the mess that the government's in.
You seem to get it, Kris, according to Rowena. What about the rest of your gang? Why don't they get it?
Well, first of all, I just want to say is that, with due respect to my colleagues here, we've got socialists who's wandered in here, and is giving us grief about...
We're one nation now, Kris, we're one nation.
There's one giving us grief about us tackling the deficit, which they created. First of all, it's all right talking about economic liberalism. This is about a government that's taken responsibility to address the financial disaster that your party created. So you give us a bloody lecture, cheeky.
That's very northern, very northern. Let's have some more questions. Let's try this side. We'll try a lady so I don't get chastised again. Lady at the back, please.
You want to ask a couple of questions and then we can put it quicker as
well.
Two questions.
Alison Hans for the Conservative Councillor at Chorley. Now, I've got a Labour husband who've been trying for 20 years to convert into Conservative Party. He's a son of a pit family and have been for 10 generations before that, but it's not just the pits, it's the shipbuilding, it's the pirates factories. We're talking right the way up to the 2000s. There's no way that you're going to get Labour supporters to vote the Conservatives unless we give them what they want.
Thank you. I'm going to take another question so we can have buy one, get one free. Tell the panel to bog off. This gentleman here on the right, please.
Does the panel agree that we shall lose the few northern working class voters we've got left if Boris ever becomes leader?
Thank you. I'll take another question as well. This gentleman here, please. On.
Jim Bedford from Skipton and Ripon, from the north. One of the things I thought this meeting was about was growth, and yet we're still rattling on about cuts and all the rest of it. Key thing that we need to focus on is growth. How we're going to get ourselves out of this mess we're in is by growth. Now, we've had lots and lots of ad hoc efforts by the government, but I just do not see that we are focusing night and day, striving for growth and managing how we implement growth programs. We haven't got a leader for growth. We have Mr. Cable, who isn't a Conservative, and he always feels a bit bumbly to me. I just don't think we need a minister for growth, and we need somebody to get on with it, because we're not doing it. We're mishmash, ad hoc, and we need some positive, organised, integrated action. A bit like the gold people, the Team GB, where they were totally focused on victory.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to call in Guy first. Do we need a rich, floppy-haired, blonde southerner to run the country? And what do we do about growth?
I'm no fan of changing leaders. I think you've just got to stick with the man you've got, and he's doing a very good job, and I support what he's doing. And Boris is doing a very good job as Mayor of London, and long may that continue. Second point is, I strongly believe that we are actually really focused now. Whether you may have had criticisms in the past, there is absolutely no question that every single government department is totally focused on getting the economy turned round. And you look at the DEFRA as an example, which is meant to be about farming and the environment. His sole purpose at DEFRA, his sole overriding job, is to get the rural economy going. And you find it, the final point is this: you say we're doing nothing. I don't agree with you. You look at the northeast, for example, my area, in September, 13,000 jobs up, increased. Apprentices up 63%. You look at the fantastic work we're doing in schools. There is huge good stuff out there. Enterprise zones. I could go on forever. We are doing some very good things. It's not easy being in a coalition. We would all like a Conservative government, sir, but I regret to say we've got what we've got, and we're making a hell of a job of it.
Alok.
I think Guy's answered the point about Boris, so I won't elaborate. Can I just say, in terms of growth, I mean, we have to look at what's happened in the last 2.5 years. When we came into government, there was a huge risk that our AAA rating was going to go, and if that had happened, we would have had interest rates going up, mortgage rates going up, businesses suffering. So I think the first thing we have to remember is that the government has actually been very good at stabilising the whole sort of economic situation, and the financial markets absolutely understand the strategy that we're following, and the deficit has been reduced by a quarter. But in terms of policies, I mean, I agree with Guy actually that there is a lot that's going on in government. In terms of jobs, we've created, or the private sector has created 1.2 million jobs since the general election. I mean, that's not a mean feat. We've got exports up. I mean, for the first time ever, we're exporting more cars than we're importing, and in fact, we're now exporting more outside the EU in the last three months than we've done ever before. And at the end of the day, this is, you're right, that you have to ensure that there is thinking which is rounded. And if you look at what's going on in terms of education as well, if my kids, their kids, if those generations are going to try and enjoy the same sort of lifestyles and standards of living that we have had, they need to be doing jobs which are value adding and value creating, and that's what a lot of the work has been going on in terms of apprenticeship. So it's not easy, but I actually think we've done quite a lot in 2.5 years.
Kris, can I bring you in then?
Well, I think the economic stuff's been, a million jobs, all that sort of thing. I think there is some really good stuff out there. We just need to keep saying it, and we need to explain what we have done actually, because we aren't articulating that strong enough. Do you know, with the Boris side of it, I mean, the media needs something to kick off about and make comparisons, and they have, a couple of decades effectively of Brown and Blair, and they're trying to generate something here. Do you know, it's easy for somebody to act the buffoon and be popular, to actually be in government and make some of the calls that we're having to make. It takes a different mentality, a different approach. I'm not bothered where they come from or what they sound like. What they say is important, but I think I don't think we'd alienate a working class. But what I would say to you is, we've got a very, very good Prime Minister, and I would say to us, it is the most popular thing we've got actually in our party, and we're coming across some sticky times. I look at the footfall in here; it's not as busy as it was last year and the year before. We don't need any good time friends. We need people to grind this out. We're trying to put a country back on its feet through some really difficult times. And actually the people in this room and the people that are pounding the streets, and we're getting a bit of kicking out there of a pasty tax and all the rest of it, we've got to keep working. All that time in opposition, we desperately believed, that we could come back and govern this country and take it to a good place. Well, we're there. We're actually back in power. Don't turn your back on it now and start scrapping with each other, because it will be the disunity will cripple us, as it did in the 1997, or up to the 1997 elections.
Right, we've only got a few more minutes left, so we're going to have tweet questions now, no more than 140 characters. Very quick, otherwise we kick you out the door. Gentleman at the back, and there's a lady at the back there with her hand up as well. No, I'm missing it.
My in-laws live in South Tyneside. My mother-in-law is probably right at the panel on most of the issues that we could talk about in the conference, and yet she wouldn't vote Conservative if you put a gun to her head. How do we reach people like that who are Conservative, their values align with the party, but absolutely hate us and would almost die inside voting for us?
Anybody else? Right, there's another gentleman right in the corner there, at the back.
Thanks, Oliver Cooper. I work for a Northern Member of Parliament that actually represents a Southern constituency, as is obviously necessary right now. In the 2015 election, if you want to win over the working classes, we actually have to present policies that appeal to working class ideas of conservatism. Cheaper food, cheaper fuel, cheaper childcare, all that stuff, rather than North London Guardian New Statesman view of what modernisation is. Sadly, we've obviously gone down that latter route. Has that been a disadvantage for us reaching out to working class people rather than choosing working class conservatism?
Well, I'm all in favour of not doing the things the Guardian wants, that's for sure. Can we take one over here as well, please? This hand, I can see the hand, but I can't see the face.
Hi. We've talked a lot about, the panel's talked a lot about its policies and what policies we need to win over northern voters, but isn't it really about people and the politics of identity, and regardless of what policies we present to people, if we're not presenting with the right types of people, sadly I don't think it's necessarily going to convert to votes on the door. And if you look at talented northerners who we might produce, they go down to London and they lead think tanks, or they go and they stand in a northern seat and they lose, and then they look for a safe seat in the south. And isn't that a vicious cycle? And until we break that cycle, we are going to really regain the north.
Right, Alok.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, in terms of cost of living, I think that's as relevant in the south as the north. And of course, the government is trying to do stuff on that. Just going back to this whole point about people sharing or having the same values as the Conservatives, but they're not being prepared to vote for us. I mean, there is no silver bullet. I started this whole sort of session with this whole parallel with what happens in terms of the ethnic minority communities. Many of them actually share the same values as the Conservative Party, but we know from all the research that's been done that a lot of them don't currently vote Conservative. So it is, it is a process of communicating consistently in a genuine fashion, and for people to feel that we are real and we actually get them, and it's simple as that. And this will take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Neil.
So, I think the look and feel of a political party really does matter. A lot of people, including my wife, are quite quick to judge political parties on the way they look and sound. So it does really matter. But of course, that on its own is just empty unless there's something in terms of policy content behind it. Unless you're really going to do things for people. I mean, one of the things we came across when we were doing our polling research on the Northern Lights project is that the social class matters a lot less than it used to in terms of the way people vote. These days we're all, we're shopping around for whichever political party is going to give us the best deal. But that's not to say it doesn't matter at all. And it's as much about how you feel you are in terms of social class as what you really do. I mean, we found that, for example, people who are in the middle of the social class spectrum, people who are C1s, in the north they tended to think of themselves as being working class. In the south they thought of themselves as being middle class. So this whole issue about the look and feel really matters. But on this point about modernisation, it's a bit too Guardian-y, too North London-y. Now, I'm certain that the central things that the public care about are the cost of living and jobs. And if you want to address those things, you can't just do it rhetorically. You need to do really big, memorable things to cut through on those things. On the other hand, it's important not to get dragged into some kind of false choices. You can be totally focused on cost of living and jobs and so on, but not at the same time want to have a socially illiberal party. things like when David Cameron apologised for Section 28, I don't think that will lose him a single working class or northern vote that he's done that, but it will open up the party to a whole group of people who at one stage really thought that this party didn't really like them very much. But the central thing, when we did our big investigation of why it was that working class people in the south are more likely to vote Tory than middle class people in the north, the central thing that changes people, the way people vote, is the local rate of unemployment. That is the main thing that matters. So it is all about the pocketbook. It's about, in contemporary politics, it's what are you going to do for me? Am I going to get my bins emptied more regularly? It's the really tangible, pragmatic stuff that people notice. Am I going to have to pay a parking charge if I go to the hospital? All these different things. And there's no one magic bullet, but a lot of those different things consistently pushing in the same direction and also changing the look and feel of the party, that is something like the answer.
Kris Hopkins?
Well, I've got to become the lady who was talking about, my family will never vote Tory, because of the mining background. There's a big issue about the BME community voting for us because they think we're racist. And there's a parallel, I think, with communities around the mining community about not voting for us. And one of the things we do is we demonstrate we aren't racist and we gain trust, and that takes a generation, I think, because we're so far behind in that discussion. But actually, to give you an idea with the BME community, one of the dramas, the BME and the mining community, education's not a priority to many of those families. And the reason being is they lived in mass, low-paid employment, and some of it was miners, some of it was in mills, all that sort of thing. And actually, to get a job wasn't important. It wasn't education, wasn't important. Now, what we can do is demonstrate in the fact that we care and we want to see them being successful and their families, is how do we take families where education isn't important and instill that necessity to go out there and get a decent education? How do we tool them up? And we make sure that we, as compassionate conservatives, actually help them in that process. And it's a journey, it's a long time to explain these different bricks that we put in place. But it takes a long time, like the defeating racism does, but actually into those families, those working class families, we were there. When those industries failed, we walked away last time. Now they're sat there, we need to get in, support them, educate them, introduce businesses there and give them a future and a job.
Neil, I think you want to make a quick point there.
Well, I kind of agree and disagree. I mean, there are particularly some ethnic minority groups, particularly younger Asians, who are obsessed with education. I mean, you've got whole families and groups of families clubbing together to pay private school fees and things like that. So it is a bit more balanced. But I mean, the trick for the Conservatives is to balance the fact that reducing the overall level of immigration is really, really popular. That's what almost all the voters want. With at the same time being very, very clear that it's not a racist thing, that there's something very proactive being done in terms of community integration. I mean, things like the Tevitt test, the cricket test, they cast a really long shadow, which is why I'd suggest really moving on from that. But, the Prime Minister himself has failed the citizenship test live on David Letterman's programme. It's not a very helpful thing. Shouldn't we be more focused on something a bit more pragmatic, like ensuring that everyone has a really good level of English? That, rather than knowing the dates of the Battle of Bannockburn, would be a lot more useful in terms of breaking down ghettos and helping everyone integrate, and also in terms of ensuring that the Conservative Party is not seen as someone you can't vote for if you're not white.
Guy?
I think in relation to your mum, far be it for me to come to North Tyneside and sit her down and say, all right, my love, this is the situation. You like Labour so much, well, social deprivation went up, the fuel price went up 10 times, immigration went up, welfare went up, schools got worse, standard of living got worse. Oh, those bad Tories, what have they done? They've levelled the fuel price off since May 2010. Welfare is capped, immigration is capped, everyone is putting hands to the pump. We're in a position that we've got skills better, education better. Why on earth are you voting Labour, my darling?
She doesn't choose it, James, but...
Oh, she's well, you really summed her up there.
And on that bombshell, we've come to the end of a rather lively and very informative Fringe meeting. Thanks to Policy Exchange for putting this one on. I think we've learned a lot today, not only from our 4 excellent panellists, but from you, the audience, some great insight into what we can do as human beings and as a Conservative Party for the North. I think things such as crime, welfare, immigration, cost of living, jobs, all come into the mix. So basically, the deficit is the big thing at the end of the day for the North, it seems like. But lots to think about and go away. Thanks again to the four columnists, four panelists. So if you put your hands together for the episode.